member of the Resources Working Group. Ooh, there we go. I'm going to just remind us why we're here and then introduce our speakers because they're who you've come to hear. But before I do that, I'd like to welcome any councillors that we have in the room. I believe Ross Mackenzie, who's the independent for Gorgie and Dalry, is here. Is that correct? Thank you, thank you. Is there anybody else who is a councillor on the City Council? Oh. Well, I know about you. Well, we do appreciate councillors taking the time and your interest in active travel, so thank you for coming here this evening. On the 1st of February, the Transport Committee of Edinburgh City Council approved the Future Streets policy. And as I'm sure most of you here are well aware, it includes the active travel plan, the circulation plan, which decides which forms of transport have priority on which streets, and the city centre transformation, which frees the centre from through traffic. Overall, what's being presented, I think, is very welcome, though there's many questions, and I'm sure we'll hear them from you this evening, and much of the detail is still to be developed. However, given the City Council's commitment to reach net zero in 6 years' time, which includes a commitment to cut car mileage by 30% by the same year, 2030, there seems to be considerable urgency to this policy. So our speakers might consider the following questions as they address the meeting. What time scale for the proposed changes, given the commitment to carbon zero by 2030? When can we expect the removal of through traffic in the city centre? And will this happen in one step, as the City of Ghent did so successfully, or will it be phased? What is the time frame for the protected cycle lanes on main routes? So that's pretty much the main topic for tonight. However, the recent Transport Committee also agreed to consult the public on the tram extension to Granton, either on road or on the Roseburn route with a path alongside. And this is proving very controversial. Again, I'm sure many of you are aware of that. So even though the consultation will not begin for some weeks, and there's clear implications about whether the tram uses the path or is on road, and there are major implications for cycling. Spokes has already published an article on our website laying out these issues in detail, and we would encourage you to read that. So we're happy to take some questions on Roseburn, but we don't want it to be the entirety of tonight's Q&A because there are lots of other things to discuss and there will be time to discuss that. And likewise, when we do come to the Q&A, I would ask you, we're going to kind of do it so that we take groups of questions. So there may not be a chance to answer everybody's question, and we'll try and move to different topics as we go. I'm going to let each of our speakers speak for not more than 15 to 20 minutes. And when it comes to the Q&A, may I remind you to keep your comments and questions short and to the point, and please keep your communication cordial. Ewan McLean is going to chair the Q&A, and I'll introduce him here because Ewan has been the backbone of Blackford Safe Routes campaign and also a number of bike buses, and I believe there's a number of you that have been involved in these bike buses. And it's such a joy for me on my Friday mornings to see the wee unicorns as I cycle into town on my way to work. But now I turn to our speakers. We're very pleased that Dr. Scott Arthur, convener of the Transport Committee of Edinburgh City Council and Labour councillor for Colinton, Oxgangs and Fairmile Head, is with us, and he will take the floor first. And then Laura Laker, environmental journalist and cycling specialist, who has kindly come up from London to speak on the Edinburgh City Council's plans. And Laura was just telling me before the start of the meeting that she has a book out in May called Pavements and Potholes. She's going to show you a picture of it, so she can do her own publicity. But we're very grateful, and I'm sorry I've got my back to you, but we're very grateful to both our speakers, and particularly for Laura for coming up from London. So, without further ado, over to Councillor Arthur.
Thank you, Emma. Is my microphone on? No. It's flat. Are we okay now? Well, that's it. Thank you. So, my name's Scott Arthur. I'm the Transport Convener here in Edinburgh. Not a job I ever wanted to do, to be honest, or even dreamt of, but here I am. So, this is the same title as last year, Transport Transition, because I think it's not about change up to 2030 and beyond. It is about a transition, and I think it's always important to remind people of that. So, what I call the challenges we face in the city, the combined challenges are already outlined, reducing car miles by 30% by 2030. That's an agreed policy here in Edinburgh. We've got to cut congestion. Edinburgh is one of the most congested cities in the UK, and we've got to get our emissions down for net zero, that 2030 target. The second thing, getting basics right while showing ambition. We'll hear about Laura's pothole book later. I'm sure it's more than potholes in her book. But when I go to community meetings right across the city, is to get the right to talk about some of the ambitious stuff we want to do, we have to show that we're wanting to get the basics right as well, and that involves filling potholes, and then also in my remit is getting bins collected as well and street cleanliness. So if we get that right, it gives us the right to talk about other stuff. So that's the getting the basics right and showing ambition. City growth, we'll set aside land for up to 37,000 houses in Edinburgh over the next few years. More are going to get built in the surrounding local authority. We're already a congested city, so we have to start thinking about how we adapt to that. So that's, my hometown is Kirkcaldy, across from Fife. So that's a town the size of Kirkcaldy, more or less, getting built inside Edinburgh. It's quite a daunting prospect. Laura, if you've never been to Kirkcaldy, it's a fantastic place. You should go. The five-dimensional party politics. We've got 5 political parties in Edinburgh, and the reality is, to get anything across the line, we need at least 3 of those parties to agree. So there's a lot of working together going on, and anybody who's tuned into the Transport Committee in the last administration, this one, will see that. I think it's partly because the personalities we have on the committee now, that there's a lot more working together, even though there is differences. Change is painful. We know when we deliver these big infrastructure projects, it can be quite painful for communities and quite painful for businesses. And I think more and more we have to be mindful of those impacts as we progress through some of the change we're going to see over the next decade or so. Inequality, Edinburgh is a really unequal city. We've got some of the wealthiest people in the UK, the wealthiest people in the world in Edinburgh, but we've also got some of the poorest, and we have to be mindful of that. And getting good access to transport for these people means they've got access to healthcare, education, training and work, so it's really important. And we're also an unequal city in terms of your access to transport. So when I go to community meetings, I'm always telling them we have one of the best public transport systems in the UK, but if I was to say that in Ratho or Dunby Dykes, I would get chased out of the room because it's pretty awful there. So there's lots to be done. And this slide here, I threw this in last night, really just to make the point about consensus. So the pavement parking ban, which I'm really proud of, it could have been controversial, and in the committee we could have spent a lot of time arguing about it. But I think because of the way the committee works now, we've managed to get a bit of consensus on that, and in fact all 63 councillors in the council voted for it, I think, twice, and then the committee approved it as well. If some of the councillors had been much more opportunistic, they could have perhaps campaigned against it, but they didn't. So I think there's 2 contrasting quotes, not contrasting. So we've got Margaret Thatcher, I'm not the number 1 member of her fan club, talking about how consensus isn't necessarily a good thing. But Gene Kranz at the top, who I am a big fan of, he was part of the Apollo programme, talking about how failure isn't really an option. And that's some of the stresses we face in the committee, is sometimes we have to accept progress, and it might not be perfect, as opposed to failure. So it's because failure isn't really an option. Cycle use in Edinburgh, this data, I think this data is the latest data I could find on published papers in the council, shows that cycling is around 4% of trips or kilometres cycled or travelled in Edinburgh. What's powerful, of course, there is public transport is already quite a strong element here. In Edinburgh, and I was speaking to bus companies from across the UK this afternoon, and they're really impressed to see the uptake of bus here, which is fantastic, bus and tram. So transport projects, this was to remind, I put this slide here first just to remind people that we are hopefully going to see some progress on the bike hire scheme, and we'll get a report on that coming to committee next month. Powerful for us to go back to that place. George Street is still kind of the active landmark project we want to progress, and I talked about that in detail last year. But just to recap, that's about creating a space which is better for people to spend time and hopefully spend money, help people's well-being, but also help boost the economy and help pull our tourism sector up market. So hopefully people will stay longer in Edinburgh when they come to visit and also spend a bit more money as well. And hopefully with that will come better jobs, better pay, better conditions. Question of funding for it from the Scottish Government, but we submitted our grant application last week for the costs we need to run that, because there's a bit of a myth that the LEZ is a money-making operation, whereas in fact it's going to cost the council money to run it, and we're seeking agreement from the Scottish Government, and I think it's there for them to fund those operating costs. CC Well, we'll launch CC Well on the 20th of March, hopefully have some from the Scottish Government come along to cut their ribbon on it, if that's what we're going to do. And I've listed here some of the active or completed projects since we last met in this room. So there's a lot happening just now, either delivered Quiet Route 61, almost delivered CC Well, and just about to start West Edinburgh Link. So I want to highlight, the reason I put that in red, I wanted to highlight it. West Edinburgh Link, it's not like a lot of other projects, it's not about connecting to the city centre, it's actually, as the name suggests, it's out in the west of the city. It's going to connect an area of real deprivation in terms of active travel, to really good employment and retail and leisure, in terms of the Gyle, and also into the water relief as well. So I think that's going to be quite a good project. Completely unacceptable, I think, these days, having an urban dual carriageway running through a residential development. So hopefully we'll see some improvement. And the first 50 of the new tranche of vehicles will arrive hopefully starting in April. And now, so the headline for these will be that they're fully electric, but I think the real story, will be the passenger experience inside them in terms of, just the difference compared to what we have just now, which is already pretty good. This is going to be way better in terms of people's experience. But we'll let Lothian Buses talk about the detail of that. So this is so the lady on your sort of left here is Sarah Boyd, who runs the Lothian Buses for us. She's MD. The chap on your right is Jim McFarlane, who's the chair of the board, and standing next to me is Cammy Day. So Jim and Sarah do fantastic work running the bus company for us. Obviously, Sarah runs it day to day. 17% uptake in passengers last year, carried 110 million passengers in a single year. Absolutely incredible what they do for us. And we really, I guess most people here live in Edinburgh, we take it for granted. The 3 in 10 bus journeys in Scotland happen on Lothian buses. £2, you can go anywhere you like, cheapest bus fare in Scotland, I think. And the drivers themselves, best pay, best conditions in Scotland. 99.6% of those journeys are completed on routes that come with no subsidy. So it's much different from bus services elsewhere in the UK, and in the envy of quite a lot of places, and we take it for granted at our peril. Tram, Hannah Ross on your left here, she delivered that tram line for us. I always say she shed blood, sweat and tears. I'm never sure about the blood bit, but she certainly burned quite a lot of energy, only for me to come along at the end and take all the credit for it. What a shame for Hannah. But you can see the tram driver in the cab there, kind of photobombing me. So this was great for us because That line down to Newhaven was supposed to be completed back in 2011, and we all know the story there. But what this showed, with that, the restart of that project, delivering it on budget and taking passengers on board ahead of schedule, showed that we're serious about this, and it shows we can deliver it. And it showed people both in Edinburgh we can do this, and also people outside Edinburgh, and that's really, really important. So that line, it was completed a small part, relatively small part of the network we have now was completed by Hannah and her team, but that's enabled us to double the patronage. So in a good month, it's carrying over 1 million people, absolutely incredible. Lothian Buses carrying 2 million per week, of course, but this is still good given that it's just one line. So it's really important for the city. And remember, it's not just about moving people, it's about stimulating the economy and making it more attractive for people to invest here. And we see, if you go down to Leith along the line, take the tram line, look at the new development along the line, that some of that might have happened without the tram, but I don't think it would have happened as quick, and that's really important. Connects people in Leith, the highest density part of Edinburgh, one of the more deprived parts of Edinburgh, to leisure and job opportunities in the city centre, out at the Gyle, and at the airport itself. You know, there's 5,000 people work in the airport in every shift, so it's a big employment opportunity for people. So Baya Carter and beyond is the next part. So I'll talk you through some of what's planned for this. So the reason I use this slide is it really emphasises that point about how the tram helped bring development to Leith, helped bring homes and helped bring jobs. Really, really important. So the line that will hopefully build and open by 2035, it'll connect Granton. We're going to build 3,500 net zero homes in Granton over the next few years. It'll take those people past, it'll connect to Edinburgh College, I have to get the order right here, the Western General, the retail park, into the city centre, past the university, past Cameron Toll, out to the Royal Infirmary, then out to South East Edinburgh, where there's massive redevelopment and development opportunities. So again, it's about jobs, and it's about investment, and it's about homes. So it's really, really important, and this helps make this happen. So the Scottish Government recognises how important this is, and that's why, hopefully, fingers crossed and all that, and touch we recognise it as a piece of national infrastructure, not just the councillors' train set in Edinburgh, which the existing line sometimes gets called. And the case for this line is really, really strong, and so strong, I think, that I really do think this is where we should have started, and perhaps we'd have a better story with tram just now in Edinburgh because of the capacity and also the opportunity. So one of the decision points we have to make is whether or not we take the tram down Roseburn or across the Dean Bridge. Then we'll go through the city centre. I'll come back to Roseburn, I think, a few other slides then out, and we'll complete it in these phases. And we'll actually have another tram depot at the other end of the line in South East Edinburgh. So the Roseburn Dean Bridge is, you know, as Emma touched on earlier, it is something that people's interested in, and they're actually two quite different routes. So it's not like we're comparing two even alternatives and flipping a coin because they're so equal. They're actually quite different. But what the committee has agreed is we'll consult on both these alternatives on an equal basis, and we'll put them through this lens. And now these are just things that I thought up when I put the slide together last night. So don't treat this as an exhaustive list, but we'll look at cost, environmental impact, carbon requirement for construction, impact on businesses and residents, construction time, journey times, and journey reliability. That's really important. Patronage and connectivity, because only the Roseburn routes give you direct access to the Western General from West Edinburgh, and that's quite important. Operating costs, and then the walking and cycling options. And I think, as Emma hinted in her introduction, no matter what route we go for, there will be active travel investment. And people probably know that I did ask in committee that when the report comes back, we look at the possibility, if it goes down Roseburn, of having a walking and cycle route alongside the tram line down that Roseburn path, which was what was originally suggested back in 2007, when the council got the permission to run a tram line down the Roseburn path. The other decision point is about whether we go along Princes Street or around the Meadows. It appears to be much less controversial than I thought it would be, and it seems quite likely that the outcome there might be that we go across North Bridge, but we'll see how the consultation response comes through on that as well. So the opportunity, once we get outside the city centre, is that we're speaking to Network Rail about reopening the southern sub, and if we get this right, we get good connectivity between that new tram line and the southern sub. Okay, 2035, of course, it's not going to happen tomorrow, but the opportunity is there to get that right. Right, can I play this video? No, before you play the video, we'll go into the future street stuff now, but I just want to play this video first, because last year, when I was here, I talked about the importance of working with disability campaigners and disability charities in order to get the balance right in terms of how we take these projects forward. Are you able to play this video with sound? I probably should have checked before we... Is it me? Do I do it?
Let's just go ahead and see what happens.
We should have trialled this beforehand. But no, it's not going to work. That's a shame.
Turn up the volume on your laptop, we might hear it.
You think so? Okay. What I'll do is I'll give you a link to the video later and it can be shared. But we're making the point that basically we've set up an Accessibility Commission. This group's going to be independent of the council, and they're going to hold us to account on some of the decisions we make around accessibility. Really important, because if you've been in Edinburgh over the last few years, you know that Edinburgh didn't always get this right, and we've left some people feeling isolated. So future streets. So, Edinburgh's quite a dense city in places, and I don't mean the people. So we have to think carefully about how the transport network's going to work in the future. If we're going to accommodate all that growth, if we're going to deal with congestion, we can't just do it incrementally. We have to have some sort of blueprint for the future. I think Edinburgh's perhaps suffered in the past from perhaps councillors closing random roads because it felt right at the time, but what this is about is having a blueprint that we can aim for and deliver against. So what the council team did was they layered the different objectives, so place, urban realm, walking, cycling, public transport and general traffic, all together, and tried to reach an optimised network. And so this is the optimised network. I know there's far too much detail here, but what this does is sets out how we want the city to evolve in terms of transport and where the priorities should be. And a lot of this has been influenced by what we've seen on Leith Walk, and Laura was there today, and I don't doubt she'll comment on it when she talks, and hopefully she won't be too harsh on us. Thank you. In this, we recognise that in most streets in Edinburgh, we can't do everything like we try to do in Leith Walk, and we can only really do two things really well. So one of those things will be walking, and then the question comes then, what is the second thing? So in a lot of our arterial routes, we're going to try to fit in public transport and where possible also cycling. And then you see doing 400 metres of that cycling network their home, so safe access to it. And also in terms of active travel, we're also looking at pedestrian connectivity to bus routes as well. In its absolute core, and that was called the Edinburgh City Centre Transformation. But what this consultation has done for us is it showed us, that previous slide, it showed us that there's appetite for this to be bigger. And also what I inherited, what my committee inherited, was a 10-year plan for doing this. And I think the consultation showed us that people want to move a bit faster as well. So this is the plan. So basically, it's about reducing, so it's not about reducing access to the city centre. So people who have blue badges will still be able to access businesses. There'll still be just as many blue badge spaces, if not more, etc. So it's not about reducing that. Businesses will still get deliveries. Residents will still be able to access their homes. It's just about reducing the through traffic. That's the focus of it. And so this is it here. And so the challenge we have, of course, is the rate at which we do that, given that people want us to move faster, I think. So that 10-year plan, so what we're going to do is we'll start probably this summer, and it might be, we discussed this morning, it might be late summer. We'll close the Cowgate to through traffic, and if that works out okay, it will never reopen to through traffic. And then next year, as we come into summer, hopefully the target is Easter. We'll then start to close the rest of the city centre down to through traffic. Now, the pace of this is really important, and I think that was one of the questions that Emma asked. So we put in place the network is it's not going to be a 10-year plan anymore. It's possible it could be a 10-hour plan, might be 10 days, 10 weeks or 10 months, but it's that kind of scale. So hopefully we'll start Easter next year, Easter 2025, and it almost certainly, hopefully, will be completed within a year. Okay, so it's a different scale, but what that means is, 2 minutes left, okay, what that means is what's not going to come with the George Street type public realm I showed you, that will have to follow on later, okay, but we'll have to do the best we can at the pace to get this right. Bus priority measures, we have a plan to increase bus travel times by 25%. Most people will know about this. It's really important. Reduce bus journey times by 25% and also improve reliability. And we've worked up some of the street cross sections for this. This is the A8, which will probably be the pathfinder for this project. But people who've been watching the budget, and this data is from Transform Scotland, so thank you, Nigel. It shows that the budget this week's not been that kind to people who are interested in sustainable transport. So the walking, wheeling and cycling budget is 100 million short of what was expected. So for Edinburgh, that means £10 million, because that's kind of pro rata our share of that. The spending on that bus priority stuff has been paused. I mean, we're reassured it is a 1-year pause. Spending to rail has been cut. I was at a meeting last week with rail operators. There's real concern about the subsidy for moving freight off the road onto tracks is being cut, real concern. But thankfully for some, they've found 210 million for roads, so there you go. So, and if people, keen observers will have noticed that I've quite cynically turned the transport hierarchy upside down. So people might want to draw their own conclusions, I don't know. But coming back to that 2030 thing, Emma, sorry, coming back to that 2030 thing, if we're seized as a country by reducing car use nationwide by 20%, 30% in Edinburgh, pausing that bus partnership fund money just pauses that target by a year, because it's unachievable without that bus partnership fund money. It's on Transform Scotland's website, So, conclusions, you'll be glad to hear, Emma, she's getting quite stressed. So here they are. The first one is really important, because I think more and more when it comes to making these changes, we're confronted by people who are concerned, and we're also increasingly we're confronted with conspiracy theories. I mean, last year, there was somebody standing almost around there that was cheered for in this room by a different meeting, not spokes, for saying that they didn't believe in climate change. And you know, and what's happening though is but I don't blame individuals for this, because as the transition gets nearer and nearer and governments are making more and more changes, people are getting left behind because it's not a just transition. And that can be fertile ground for people who are wanting to spread conspiracy theories. And that's something we have to get right. And that's why right at the start I put that poverty and inequality line. We have to work with employers and accessibility campaigners. We're doing that. We have to work cross-boundary, and that's particularly true on the bus partnership stuff. And we have to contribute to towards national progress, because if we align our policies with the Scottish Government and to a lesser extent the UK Government, it means we get access to funding for what we want to do. And I think I'm right in saying that even though people might have guessed that my party is not part of the Scottish Government, I think I'm really keen to maximise that alignment between Edinburgh and the Scottish Government, and I think it's really...
Thank you for your talk, and thanks, Spokes, for having me, and thank you to Michaela for hosting me. It's great to be back in one of my favourite cities. I'm quite windswept. I've had a day of cycling round Edinburgh and looking at the new cycle lanes, and yeah, it's been quite an exhausting day, but kind of exciting and fun, and it's great to see what's changed since I was last here. So I'm Laura Laker, I'm a journalist. You're very fortunate fortunate to be able to see it. So I do feel like a bit of an imposter being asked to a city that I don't live in to critique the transport plans. And when Dave emailed me to ask me here, I was like, great, that'll be fun. And then I realised what was being asked of me to critique these transport plans. And I thought, okay, that'll be great. I'll be fine. I'll do it in a week. So a week ago, I opened up this immense document, basically, with about a gazillion words. And I think if you laid them end to end, they probably stretch along the canal here all the way to the Forth and Clyde in Glasgow. And I was thinking, oh my God, what do I do? But I think, basically, I think it kind of boils down to what's happening on the ground. And, the plans are very exciting. So 9 years ago, I visited Edinburgh. I've got form turning up here, writing about what's happening or talking about what's happening in Edinburgh. And at the time, there was a budget for cycling, which was quite novel in the UK, a long-term budget, and I wanted to see what it was being spent on. There was a tram happening, but the cycling routes around it seemed to be very much a kind of afterthought. And I know that people were falling off bikes and getting injured, and there was a cycle lane on George Street, a trial cycle lane. Do you remember that? Almost a decade ago. And so I cycled along that. But that seemed to be kind of off of the main route, and it was up a hill and down a hill again. And I was thinking, well, this doesn't seem like it's very joined up thinking. So anyway, there were bits and bobs, but not very much on the ground. In 2022, I did a whistle-stop tour, literally a whistle-stop tour. I had a couple of hours in the city. I got given a map. And I said, show me what has happened since 2015. And there were a couple of wands in the road, but it seemed to be that this was the change. This is a small piece of cycle lane, and it kind of went to a pedestrian crossing and then out the other side. And that seemed to be it. So I thought, well, not much has happened. And I was starting to lose from different cities. And there have been wonderful plans from towns and cities around the UK and around the world. But all they add up to is a paper network. And Chris Boardman says in my book, did I say I've got a book? He said this as well. It's very easy to make plans. What's hard is to actually implement something on the ground. So today, as I said, I've been given a whistle-stop tour. Oh, yeah. I was already aware of one thing that had happened in Edinburgh. And I'd forgotten when I arrived. Someone said Leith Walk, and I was like, oh my God, that's in Edinburgh. I'd forgotten. The comedy bike lane. So, so this happened. But today I was very glad sorry, that laugh was really loud. I was very glad to see today that a lot more has happened. And Leith Walk, I think, seems to be a kind of growing pain stage in Edinburgh's transport cycling revolution. So, Anyway, so today I've been everywhere. I spent hours and hours riding around. Beautiful weather. Thank you for arranging the great weather for me. I've been to CCWell, which is City Centre West East Link, I think, which was wonderful. I saw this one, which is great. Saw that one, it's really good. I climbed a mud mountain, which is the Roseburn to Union Canal link. It's just a mud mountain at the moment. It's going to be a garden with a cycle route through it. And that's going to be fantastic. So that was pretty exciting. And then I saw the low traffic neighbourhood in Leith and the nice quiet streets around there, and that was beautiful. Sadly, there's no pictures of me in high vis, but it did happen. I was also aware before some great citywide plans or implementation of plans, the 20-mile-an-hour zone, which I understand is one of the first and most extensive in the UK, and the pavement parking ban, which is a massive thing. I know that in England we had a consultation, I don't even know how many years ago now, and nothing has happened on the ground. So fantastic to Edinburgh for doing that. And also school streets. I think Edinburgh was one of the first cities in the UK to do school streets. When I was reading about it, that was really quite forward-thinking. So to the plans. I opened the files, I looked through the files, I spent a lot of time reading a lot of very dense writing. But I think, and I know that Dave is amazing at analysing all of these documents, and and your website is very dense as well, and it's got lots of great information. So I think what I can bring is maybe perspective in terms of seeing different cities around the country and around the world and what they have done for cycling and kind of comparing it. So the circulation plan. It does seem to be a very kind of systematic look at the way that transport works in the city. And I know that in the past, projects have happened, and I think Leith Walk was a product of a tram being built, and then some pavement needing to be put in, and some buses, and some loading, and then at the end, there's a cycle lane, which kind of does this. Whereas I think having a citywide plan is really important in terms of understanding what goes where and how it all links up. Understandably, a big focus on public transport. I spoke to Councillor Arthur yesterday, and we were talking about how many bus journeys there are in the city. And I think if you're talking that, and already a lot of people are walking in Edinburgh, and so that's going to be a huge part of it already. And although we're here about cycling, there's a bigger picture piece. So in terms of cycling, there are three main parts. There's the circulation plan, which is pictured here. There's the active travel action plan, and that is basically to deliver a joined-up network of routes which go within 400 metres of all homes in Edinburgh, and there'll be main road routes and low-traffic neighbourhoods. So in London, where I live, I'm on the edge of a low-traffic neighbourhood. I go across the low-traffic neighbourhood to Stratford, and then I get on this long cycle lane. I can travel 12 miles across the city, all on protected cycle routes or low-traffic neighbourhoods. So this kind of network does work, and thinking about cycling as a network and connecting homes to the main road routes is really important. And then there's the low-traffic neighbourhoods and this kind of concept of 20-minute neighbourhoods that everything is within easy reach, which is how towns and cities used to be. And I think the introduction of cars and the prevalence of cars has kind of changed how we move and how we live in our cities. And I think getting back to that is really valuable. I was really impressed with the cycling plans because it seems to be a very comprehensive look at what's happening, what needs to happen for cycling. So it's everything from cycle lanes to e-bike charging to cargo bikes for businesses, safe routes to schools, junctions, maintenance, which is really important. And I know from writing my book, one of the reasons we have such shoddy bike lanes in the UK is that they're built and then nothing's done to maintain them. So they kind of disappear, the bike lanes of Avalon sort of thing. So does seem to be very much about a holistic approach and behaviour change, which is really important. I think it's sometimes called a sort of soft measure, but actually cycling seems intimidating for a lot of people. And I know there's some great groups in Scotland working on getting people into cycling and having that social support. So it's really, really important. I think it's okay for confident people just to get on a bike, but a lot of people, I think you're normal in this country if you feel that cycling is scary or intimidating and you don't want to share with traffic. That's kind of a normal approach or a normal perspective. So there we go. So I think this is the big map that we've already seen. You might be familiar with Ghent, the circulation plan there. So I guess it's similar to that. And in terms of some stats, there's been a huge impact on air pollution. It costs €5 million, which in terms of transport is pretty cheap. I know, like in Edinburgh, there was a very long lead-up time, 2.5 years, and then over a weekend they managed to implement the circulation plan, so you can't drive through the city. Cycling increased massively, but note that they already had quite high cycling levels, much higher than Edinburgh. What is it, 4% here? Yeah? Car shares, a great way of sort of you can still use your car, but you don't need it all the time. That increased. 20% drop in city centre traffic. I think 40% of car journeys weren't ending up in the city. They were just kind of going through. So that's just to say that as actually a very similar sized city, this was a great success, although obviously in a different culture and different cycling levels. I thought this was an amazing statistic. 70.7 million trips of less than 3 miles are done in Edinburgh every year, which is kind of astonishing. Yeah, it's pretty astonishing. We know that residents support cycling. You've done some research on this, and we've got a couple of graphs at the end, and Sustrans has done. And quite a few people already cycling at least once a week, 26%, that's a quarter of people, which is quite big. I think this is going to be a challenge. This is always a challenge anywhere you go. There's balancing needs and demands, and in a narrow, wiggly, squiggly city like Edinburgh, that's going to be a challenge. I know in Glasgow they're doing great things with cycle routes, but there's lower in the offices. Yep. So, yeah. Oh yeah, Leith Walk was a one-time thing. Absurdist, maybe sad, but I think the rest of us probably glad. And in terms of tackling through traffic where there's local support, I think it's great, it's positive to hear, and I know that councils around the country and in London have really struggled with this. The fact that stuff happened very quickly during the pandemic and people felt like things were being done to them and there was no control, and obviously the trauma of the lockdowns. And so having that conversation with local people is really important, and we may know in this room, many of us, that the benefits of being able to walk and cycle in our neighbourhoods and having less traffic. But I think this is a conversation that we need to have. There was a local councillor who did a talk in my area recently, and she talked about just approaching it with kindness. And I think it's kind of, maybe it sounds a bit cheesy, but I think it is important to be able to have those conversations and to bring people along, because like Councillor Arthur was saying, a just transition needs to feel like, people need to feel like they're being listened to. And yeah, it's easy to sort of shout at people and say, we know we're right, but yeah, I think that conversation is important. But then also, we know there's support for these measures, and I guess that means listening, but not buckling under pressure. So this is the picture of George Street. So a decade on, it's going to happen apparently. And many of the plans that we've seen, many of the cycle routes that I've seen today, cycling around, have been in train for a decade, which is astonishing really. And if this is a kind of 2030 plan, then everything's going to need to ramp up very quickly. And a number of council officers I met today feel very confident that now things are in train and the processes are there, and this complicated but very detailed plan is here. In a way, they were saying it simplifies things because everything's set out. You know how everything should work. There's going to be tweaks, but ultimately this is what is needed. So who knows? I guess the proof will be in the pudding, like we said. 2015 to 2022, a couple of funny little bike lanes. 2022 to 2024, I mean, I was cycling from 9:30 to 3:30 today, cycling around the city and talking about bike lanes. There's quite a lot going on, actually. So a lot has happened, but there's a really long way to go. It did feel to me like the kind of early days of London when the transformation was happening there, because I was living in the city there. It felt like Cardiff's done a lot. It kind of felt like that. There's like a momentum happening, possibly, but it has to carry on. So, yeah, that's kind of a joke, but who knows? Bit hillier, but less wind. So, oh no, there's more wind. It's hills and wind. Don't know what that means. So yeah, competition from Dublin as well. Dublin's doing a circulation plan, so you've got competition from over there as well. So yeah, if that's a motivator for you. Yeah, so Edinburgh is not alone. There are cities around the world doing this. We've got Paris, which has had all tube trips on bikes. It's amazing. It's Glasgow. Competition. Yeah, it's a good bike. They've got some good bike lanes over there, I'm just saying. So there's reasons to be hopeful. Consensus building is positive, but also it's going to take, to deliver this stuff takes political will, ultimately. And it will come down to people being able to stand up for this and to realise that, oh, you can't actually see that, sorry. This is from Sustrans Cycling and Walking Index. And it basically says, it's quite interesting because when you poll people about stuff, when there's a consultation about cycle lanes and low traffic neighbourhoods, quite often you get people who are very motivated either way. You get people who feel very strongly for or very strongly against. And it kind of skews the data. But when you go out to the general population and you ask people who might not respond to a consultation, that's when you get the bigger support. So that's basically what that shows. Consultations don't always show the whole picture. We've got a decade of legwork. Stuff's happening now. Reasons to be hopeful. There seems to be motivation. There's definitely plans that you've committed to. You're not doing this alone. There's other cities around the world. Forward-thinking cities are doing this all over the globe. Political will. And, oh, that's the bike life stuff. That's the first one was actually your research, wasn't it? Yeah. So, overarching plan seems very positive. And, thinking about the city as a whole, not just bits and bobs fighting each other. So that's got to be a good thing. And if the process can be accelerated, then things are looking very bright. And I kind of came to Edinburgh thinking, well, of Edinburgh, just to show that, streets change quite dramatically over time. So there you go. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura, for that presentation and for being kind of cautiously optimistic about Edinburgh. It's nice to have that contrast. I'm going to ask Ewan McLean to come up with a chair. And sort him, you can take that one if you like. But this is something of a commercial break, because before we go to the Q&A, and whilst you're thinking of your questions, I'm just going to make a few announcements. And I better find out what they are. So, one or two things that you might be interested in or need reminding of. Living Streets is holding an online meeting specifically on the city centre proposals at midday tomorrow, the 1st of March. So if you go to livingstreetsedinburgh.org.uk. And then there's the Infosisters Ride on Friday the 8th of March at 7:30 p.m. from the Middle Meadow Walk International Women's Day, Bloomin' Mad in Bloomers. So the ride will end at an exciting Active Travel Street projections event at the Causey in Southside. Now, I think at least one of the organisers is here. Kirsty? Just if you want more information about that event, Kirsty's there. Go and seek her out. Then on the 20th of March, we've just heard about the opening of CC Well. More information from Scott Arthur, if you'd like. On the 30th of March is the monthly Critical Mass cycle ride. Is there anyone who wants to wave a hand and be responsible for that if you want to hear more? Sam, wave a hand. So if you would be interested in joining the Critical Mass cycle ride on Saturday from 2 p.m. in the Meadows, Middle Meadow Walk, do ask Sam more about that. And then I would like to very much thank our volunteers this evening. We had Michaela, Drew and Claire on refreshments, so thank you to you. And David on the membership stall. And if you're not already a member of Spokes, please consider joining. David McLeod is at the back there. If you are a member and would like to be more actively involved, do consider joining one of our working groups, or rejoining if you were once a member and would like to get involved again. We have the resources group, the planning group, maps group, Portobello group, and South Edinburgh group. And I'm going to ask people to stand up or show hands if you're a member of that group, and then you can actually see somebody you can identify and go and talk to. So, resources, that's me. Other people who are in resources, Rosie at the back, Dave here. If you want to know what we do, please ask Dave and Rosie. I just follow orders, really. Planning group. Who's, okay, great. People standing up and waving hands over there. So please go and seek them out. Is there anybody here from MAPS? Andy at the front here, if you're interested in that. Portobello? Okay, again, Kirsty, if you're interested in joining the group, particularly interested in cycling Portobello. South Edinburgh, is there anyone from South Edinburgh? Okay, a couple of people waving their hands there. So please do chat at the end. We have to be out of the building at 10, but go and see those people, ask them for more information, ask them what's required. And thank you to all of you who are on the lists for stalls and for occasional volunteering. It's really very, very much appreciated. Right, now is the time that you've all been waiting for, and I'm going to hand over to Ewan, who has a mic and a chair, and who is going to lead us in the Q&A. Thanks very much, Ewan.
Thanks very much, Emma. Impressive work by Martin there at the last minute, fixing the technical issues. I'd like to say massive thanks to both Councillor Arthur and Laura Laker for brilliant talks, very hopeful talks. And yeah, just you don't want to hear from me, so let's hear first question.
Councillor Arthur, I live quite close to here and I tend to walk, and that's number one in your hierarchy of getting around the city. If you walk, you've got to cross the road. You've got lots of green men, some of them in Broughton Street, for example, press a button, 4 seconds later, green man appears. In Melville Drive, similar thing. Second time round, it's 29 seconds, which is fair enough. You go out the Cameo, press the green man there, and it's 1 minute, 13 seconds. You begin to lose the will to live. Is there a council policy on that? Or has it just been like that? I've been that way.
Can you hear it? Yeah. So that was one of the questions we asked in the City Mobility Plan last year, was about priorities at junctions. I think in the past, a lot of our infrastructure has been designed to maximise the movement of vehicles rather than maximising the movement of people. And so this is a legacy we're working through, and I'm pretty sure the consultation showed last year that people want greater pedestrian priority at junctions. And in fact, the pedestrian crossing, hopefully the one, I always get the name of the street mixed up, the one that's next to the Bike Co. What's the name of that street? Is that still Whitehouse Lane there? Yeah, so our hope is there that green man will be stuck on green until a vehicle comes along, and then it would only go to a red man when a vehicle comes along. So changing the priority completely on roads like that. And yeah, so yeah, it is something we are taking seriously, making it easier for people to get around. And you know, and also a lot of walking trips, let's face it, are about accessing public transport. So we make it easier for people to get to their bus stop. They're more likely to use the bus than they are to use their car. So all good. So thank you for raising it, actually. And well done for timing all these green men.
I guess I'd actually like to ask Laura a response to that as well, in terms of, has she seen similar movement towards prioritisation of pedestrians over cars in other cities? You talked about looking at other cities.
Yeah. I know it's something that London has done, and it's really important because we're an ageing population. It's hard for people to stand and wait, and also in terms of having enough green time to cross the road. And that's been a big movement in some cities to extend that time. I think like Councillor Arthur said, in the past, it's all been about through movement of traffic, and there are priority roads. And I think sometimes councils just don't look at this kind of stuff. It just stays the way it's always been, and sometimes it's been tweaked. I'm not saying it in Edinburgh, but in other cities, I know that it's been the wait time for pedestrians has been extended, so you get more through traffic. But if you're going to start switching the priorities around, ultimately, if it's raining or freezing cold, the person standing in the rain or in the cold is the one paying the price, so not the one in the warm car.
It also makes people more likely to take the risk and cross without the green man, and that's when we have accidents.
Yeah.
Thanks for that answer. We've got a question at the back on the left.
Yeah, it's another question for Scott Arthur. Given that we've just think that the link, what you called the mud hill, from the canal to Roseburn, every publication that I read justified the building of that on the grounds that it was going to link to the Roseburn path. I think it's really important when an incoming council has, you've got to join things up. and see one thing through from the end to the beginning, as it were. Personally, I was against the trams, but ripping them up and starting again is a dumb idea. But so is ripping up the path. And, you know, especially when you've just spent 15 million connecting it to the canal, is that actually going to be, you know, are we going to stop doing unjoined up city planning?
So maybe I wasn't clear earlier. So the work we're doing just now on the two options for the tram, so Roseburn or across Dean Bridge, there will be if it goes down Roseburn, we are looking at putting good quality walking and cycling alongside the tram on that route, so it will be connected. But hopefully there'll be other connections to that piece of infrastructure as well going forward. And that piece of infrastructure is a really good example of where the last administration were willing to take that decision around removing, I think, literally hundreds of trees in order to do the right thing in terms of our climate obligations in the longer term.
Yeah, we're not going to have, was told before, we won't have too many questions about Roseburn Perth, but please, next question.
Okay, bear with me on this. Just cycled Haymarket to Ainsley Park in 15 minutes with 2 kids on the bike trailer, gymnastics and swimming. Without the path, I'd be in my car, taking longer. The kids missing out on the whole experience of getting outdoors and being in nature. Today, we talked about the smell of garlic. On the way back, we'll pick some. Samantha, cyclist. A beautiful and safe space to cycle, giving me access to the sea without fear or anxiety. Ingeborg, cyclist. I use the Roseburn path for walking, jogging and cycling. This has been the best space in Edinburgh for me to have a routine, for me, my physical and mental health. Dara, cyclist. These are just a few of the voices in the loud chorus of support for saving the Roseburn path as an active travel corridor, urban green space and cycling route. Firstly, to Spokes. Why doesn't Spokes, the campaign for cycling in Edinburgh, want to join them? And secondly, to Councillor Scott Arthur, how do we make sure these cyclists are heard?
I'd just like to say this meeting was specifically about future streets, and I was asked, we've got an expert here to talk about future streets and the future planning. I can see that there's a lot of emotion about this question. I'll let Councillor Arthur answer this question because it's an important question to answer, and I thank for the question. Spokes has actually produced a response to this, and I know no doubt in future meetings there'll be more detailed responses to this. It's a quite emotive question, I understand that. But I'll let Scott Arthur answer this, first of all.
On again. Maybe I'm not being clear again. So what the council's looking at is if we go along Roseburn Path, just now they're looking at providing walking and cycling along the tram route if it goes along the Roseburn Path. And as part of the consultation, we'll provide cross sections which shows that hopefully quite a lot of the green space will be retained. I mean, and that's a fact. And you know, and I welcome you sharing those testimonies, but the reality is that we have a moral obligation to, you know, get transport in Edinburgh on a more sustainable footing, about getting the whole city towards net zero, and that's an obligation that we have to take seriously. And there's no adjustment we can make to accommodate the impact of climate change that doesn't come with compromise. So you read testimonies today from people in Edinburgh. We could read testimonies from people in the developing world who are faced with loss of life, loss of livelihood, and you know, loss of ecology on a horrendous scale. But the changes we make here are about mitigating those impacts right across the world for the most vulnerable communities. So we have to get this right. It's an important decision for a city like Edinburgh. We have to show leadership and respond to the climate emergency. And investing in public transport and active transport is absolutely part of that. If you take a look at the planning committee, take a look at the planning committee. Every week they're making decisions around new developments, about building homes in a sustainable way. In West Edinburgh, 23,408 homes are going to be created in the coming decade. A huge scale, but the city is committed to doing that in a sustainable way to minimise the impact on the environment. And that's because we take our climate commitments seriously about reducing the impact of climate change right around the world. Remember that was it? Think globally, act locally. That's what we have to remember. But this open consultation where both alternatives were presented in an equal way. I outlined that in my slides earlier. Apologies if I wasn't clear.
Thanks. I'd like the following questions not to be about the Roseburn Perth, but more generally the future streets. Yes, if you like to. Question at the front. Sorry.
So on future streets, the first thing that will happen is an experimental closure of the Cowgate, just down here, where a couple of us have got music venues. The Cowgate is Edinburgh's music street, and you said earlier that businesses will get the deliveries. What we as a business get deliveries is deliveries of performers and their equipment. It can't possibly be something that works similar to the Royal Mile, where it works to certain times, etc. So what thought have you given to that, and why has there been no consultation with the businesses that will be affected?
So we have consulted on the plan as a whole, but not specifically for your street. So we did consult. You've seen the map up there. We asked people where they wanted less traffic. So you've seen the map is shared. So the current phase we're going through is about that engagement with businesses and residents and also suppliers to those businesses to make sure we get it right. And remember, what we're talking about is no through traffic. It's not a prohibition on traffic. So business, you'll still get access. People still can deliver to your business. I mean, another business was in touch about this this week, actually. I forget, I couldn't share the name anyway, we had a discussion, and he was reassured by what we're doing. But there's no plan yet. Maybe you shouldn't put it in those terms. The plan is still evolving, and there will be engagement with businesses and residents right along the Cowgate to make sure we get this right. Because as I said earlier about change is painful, this is about improvements to the city, making the city centre a better place to visit, spend money, and also make money if you're running a business in the city centre. So it's important we get this right. We don't want to destroy the city centre in the process. And as I said, the impact on public transport is what's limiting the rate of progress we want to see. And that's about making sure the city centre continues to thrive in all sorts of ways. So I'm on your side, absolutely. And get in touch after.
There's a consultation, I guess it should be about, speak to businesses about how it's done.
That's going to happen. So that's operational plan, that'll happen. Email me after the meeting and I'll put you in touch with the person that's leading on that.
I'd like to.
She's probably watching on YouTube right now, actually. But
I'd like to put that question also to Laura, because she's got an experience from other cities in the world that will no doubt have solved this problem. But I'd also like to point out there are some brilliant people here from the Cargo Bike Collective, the Cargo Bike Movement, who do indeed use this sort of delivery for the shorter deliveries in the city. I'm just pointing that out as something that's possible for the smaller things. But I'll ask Laura to respond about this sort of thing in terms of.
Yeah. I think where street use changes have been successful is where businesses have been consulted and understand what's happening, and it works for them. But it sounds like something that can be resolved. I mean, like you said, it's not going to be a no through. I mean, if it's not going to be a no through route, then hopefully it can be resolved. And I know in my area, when we had a low traffic neighbourhood, the council were very good at being quite agile and changing stuff. So a planter was in a place where it was difficult for someone to get in and out, and they would move it. And I think it earned trust from the community, and it also helped to finesse the scheme. And I think the cities and the councils that have been most successful have been the ones that have been able to be agile and respond to genuine concerns and business use needs. So
get in touch and make it work.
That very useful and pertinent question. We'll just go over their question now. I think it's the next one. Thanks.
Hello. My question might sound a bit like it's about semantics, but I think it's a bit more than that. It was mentioned before in terms of how the council is trying to fit ideally 2, maybe 3 things onto streets. And you discussed walking, you discussed cycling, you discussed buses as sort of the order priority. One thing wasn't mentioned, but I think it's sort of become a bit of an assumption, and it's cars. And I think the fact that wasn't brought up as one of the things that we should at least include in that, in order to then have a serious discussion about where they belong and where they maybe don't belong, I think that's an important point. If it was just a slip up and maybe it will be brought up later, that's fine. But I did notice that, and I was curious as to what we want to discuss. This would not be a universal approach, of course, but this is just incorporating our understanding of if we're discussing 2 or 3 things fitting on the street, and we're saying cycling and walking, but we're just throwing in cars as an assumption that they will fit and not discussing whether or not they should fit or whether or not they should even be included in the first place. I think that's worth having as a discussion. I'd also direct this towards Laura, and in other cities where you've seen councils try to address priorities and the transit pyramid, where they bring it up. I think I've worded this a bit badly, but hopefully you try to get my point. And slightly attachment to that question, but I noticed when talking about the Ghent plan and what your officers proposed as the possible consequences, you mentioned an increase in bus journey times, 40% if I remember correctly. I was wondering if there was any cause associated to that, and if it was possible to get more details on that, because I was quite curious as to what that implication was.
Okay, I guess I'll ask Councillor Arthur that question first, but the question was, in his slides, which I think were very useful and dense slides, you want slightly more explicit understanding of where cars might exist and where not exist in the plans.
So this is difficult, you know. So as we heard from the chaps at the front here around the business, is that if we follow the war on cars narrative, which a lot of people are engaging in now, and I don't think that's what we're doing here, is that it's the easiest thing in the world to completely block off the city centre to cars. But then the question, the real damage would then come is the movement of goods and services, particularly into those city centre locations, both for residents and for businesses. And that's what we have to get right. So that's why it's no through roads rather than, you know, a complete prohibition on cars. And that's covered in the map here through what we call general traffic. So that's it's not helpful, it's in grey. So the 3 columns in the key there, it's the top one there. So that's absolutely part of that, and we acknowledge that there'll still need to be some cars moving around the city. I quite often talk about non-essential car use is what we're trying to, the non-essential through traffic is what we're trying to remove, but that accepts that there will be people who still need to use their car. And the good news is, if you are somebody who needs to use your car, you might be a blue badge holder, fewer cars on the road should hopefully mean it's easier for you to move around. Now, the challenge is as we move cars off of these cut-through routes in the city centre, or that through traffic, it means more of that traffic is going to end up on the routes where we still want to enable cars to move. And that's where the impact on public transport comes, because there's also public transport on those routes. And as I said, as it stands just now, if we were to bring in the ban overnight tonight, I've got other plans tonight, I'm afraid, there would be a 40% increase in bus journey times, and there would also be an increase in general traffic as well. So what the team's working on just now, between now and hopefully Easter next year, is thinking about how we make this work in a way that really reduces down those impacts on bus journey times. Because the reality is, through this change, the city centre is going to be a much better place to be, spend time, and hopefully spend money with you guys. But people have to be able to get there. And if they're faced with a long trip, sitting in a bus, there's nothing worse than being sitting in a bus that's not moving. You feel quite claustrophobic and trapped. It's not going to work, so we have to make that work. And in fact, I was down to Lothian Buses this afternoon, speaking to them before I came here, and that was one of the points we went through with them, because it's really important for them as well to get this right.
There was a specific question about what was it exactly that caused the 40% delay.
It is just that all the traffic getting condensed onto what will be the key routes which we allow traffic to go through. Primarily, the primary concern is around Lothian Road, up Lothian Road, and in the Turner Youngblock Place. If you go and check on the committee papers, there's modelling details there. It gives you journey times for different routes under different scenarios. For some of the bus journey times overnight, they're better, you know, but for some of the key routes, the bus I use, they're slower, so we'll try and fix that.
The question was also directed at Laura.
Yeah. So should we have cars in cities at all?
No, it's not how we incorporate that understanding into the system.
Yeah.
On a case-by-case basis and see where, and I think the wording that Councillor Arthur used, essential car use.
Yeah.
I would adjust it to that.
Yeah.
Where that can then be.
Yeah. So I think, I mean, I'm not kind of against cars, full stop, and you know, sometimes it's very useful to use them. And I think this model of having the no through route in the city centre is quite a useful one, because, and the low traffic neighbourhood kind of model, because you can get in and out. And you know, if I need to move some furniture, I live in a low traffic neighbourhood, I will hire a car or a van, and you know, go in, you know, you can work it out. But it's just about discouraging people. Do the easiest thing, basically, and it's about providing alternatives. Yeah, sorry, I've got a million clicky buttons on my presentation. I'm trying to flick back through. It's going to take you a year. So yeah, I think it's just about providing people with choice, basically, and then people will do the easiest thing. And if the bus is the easiest thing, I mean, in London we've got great bus ridership, and in Edinburgh, because it's a good service, and once you start to prioritise it, then it becomes easier. And I think people will do the kind of, it kind of makes me think of SimCity and seeing the cycle lanes develop in London. You know, you build something and people use it. And the Elizabeth line and the trams here, you know, people will use what's there. And so if you make it kind of more balanced around different modes, then that's what you get.
So
Thanks
the
very
general
much.
traffic routes are the black routes on this map.
Was it? My question directly relates to this point about Lothian Road. I commend the plan. I think it's really ambitious. However, say Shamwick Place Junction and Tollcross Junction, they're both in the most dangerous hierarchy of junctions in the whole city for cycling. Are they going to be improved before next year? And Lothian Road, about 5 lanes wide per points. Will there be any reduction in the road space to have segregated cycling on that route?
So as I said earlier, none of this comes without compromise. And so you're familiar with the Lothian Road Boulevard approach. If we go down this route, there's going to be a real compromise with that. So because in that we're going to have to maintain space for general traffic, particularly goods and services coming into the city centre, and also public transport. And there's going to be probably more vehicles on that than there is just now. So we have to think about, I mean, the last time we spoke about it, we did think there's space for walking and cycling improvements alongside it, but it's probably not going to be as we've seen previously, particularly in the junction, from the junction north of where the Western Approach Road comes in. Perhaps south of there's more flexibility, but north of it's going to become harder. But there will be improvements at the junction where the student died a few years ago. Those improvements hopefully should still come. And likewise at Tollcross as well.
Did you experience these junctions today?
I'm not sure. I've been everywhere. Everywhere.
Johnny Walker.
I'm not sure.
Okay, not to worry.
Hello, H. First, I'll take Laura to task here because they didn't build it and the cyclists came. In 2007, the drain closed in London. Cycle use at Waterloo went up like a rocket. Cycle parking was filled to 300% of capacity, and 25% of the vehicles crossing Blackfriars Bridge were bikes before they built cycle lanes. And that's why they built cycle lanes, because the demand just surged.
I don't think that's true.
Well, we can. Anyway, I've been 60 years doing engineering and transport, and in that time I've always cycled and driven on pavements called carriageways. And I think we need to sort of get our terminology right, because we haven't been allowed to drive on a footway in order to park on it for the past 189 years. That's been the law.
But you can talk about semantics.
That's semantics, but what we've done is we've spent an awful long time in dealing with the helicopter defence and looking at things from a different end of the telescope. I'd also like to find out from Lothian Country when they are going to restore cycle carriage on the former SMT routes, because if you live outside and you want to come in, it's not nice to cycle out in the pitch at night going home on a fairly busy minor road, rural road. And to be able to just put your bike on the bus is great. Perrymans are doing it out to Dunbar. Borders are doing it down to Galashiels and Peebles. And there are companies doing it in the northeast. I think we need to work on Lothian Country and Lothian buses.
Can I ask you to come to an actual question for Scott Arthur?
Can we get that done, to work on the buses? And also, I'm a bit of a pavement nerd. Instead of just putting dods of tarmac in potholes, fix the road underneath. I am watching a section of the A82 sinking where it sank before because they haven't fixed the basic problem. And junction 17 is going to close.
Okay, I'm going to stop. Thanks very much for the question. I'm going to praise the question to Scott Arthur as being, is there plans, which I think is a very good question, to integrate cycling and active travel with the bus network, which I think is a great And I think there are buses like Ember which are quite good at this, and quite progressive about this. And so, is this part of the plan that you've seen in the future streets?
I mean, something I have spoken to in terms of the integrating the public and active travel plan, is something we have spoken to Lothian about, is the notion of having transport hubs where people can bring their bikes, park up, get on the bus, so safer places around some bus stops so people can access the bus network via bike. But to be honest, I've not had discussions with them about people bringing their bikes on buses, and people probably know that even if you bring a fold bike onto Lothian buses, it has to be in a clean and secure bag. To defend them, some of the routes are incredibly well used, so they have to get the balance right between demand for both, passengers and passengers with bikes. But the next time I meet them, tomorrow actually, I'll try to mention that to them.
I was a bit blunt, Dave H, about 2007, because actually I remember during the tube strikes, there were feeder rides into the city centre from London Cycling Campaign, and numbers did go up, but then people realised how horrific the roads were to cycle without the cycle lanes, and then they stopped. It's a thing called churn. You get these peaks, and then people have a scary experience, and they put their bike away, and they don't get back on. So it did happen, but it wasn't the reason for the long-term growth. And maybe, I know that Johnson went on some of the feeder rides, and maybe that helped him to see actually this was something that was possible. Yeah.
Question just there.
Thank you. Hi there. This is more for Councillor Arthur, I imagine. You said in your opening slide, I think, that you were personally responsible for the basics, and you mentioned keeping the streets clean and potholes. Edinburgh streets are truly lethal for cyclists because of potholes, and it's been deteriorating. Is it because you don't get funding from central government, or what's the reason for the lethalness of our streets for cyclists?
So I had an informal chat with Cycling Scotland yesterday, and they brought up that general point about infrastructure's great, but there's also a need to get the basic running service right for everybody, and likewise the same meeting, which is about road safety actually. Living Streets made the same point, but about footpaths. So when I became convener, I've shared this recently, in the committee I asked the chap who's in charge of the Road and Footpath Maintenance Project where we were in terms of funding. So when I was convener, Road and Footpath Maintenance, when I first became convener, was underfunded to the tune of about £8 million per year. So that meant that, back then we needed an additional £8 million just to maintain things in the state they're in just now. So that's where we were then. Last year's budget, we moved from, let me get this right, so the budget back then was £11 million when I became convener. Last year we moved that budget from 11 million to 22 million. Last week the budget moved from 22 million, I think I'm right, to 23.5 million. So we are taking it seriously because it is causing real issues in the city. There was a mum in my ward who put a hole in her bike and she broke her jaw. So it's completely, and it's shameful, the state of the roads. And when I first became convener, I said it was both street cleanliness and road and footpath condition. I said it would always be honest about it, and I have been. And in fact, hopefully nobody repeats this, our data shows that, you might not believe this, shows that road and footpath condition is very slightly starting to improve. But so small you can hardly measure it. But I never ever talk about that in the media because this is the response I would get, because it's just not good. People can open their curtains and see in the road outside them that both the footpath and the road often is not where it wants to be. And even Emma was giving me a hard time about the footpath in her street. She lives quite close to me. Today when I arrived here. So this is a real issue in the city. We have to get that right, and we have to get the other stuff right as well. But I'll just correct one thing. I'm not personally responsible, but I do take responsibility. And I am just one of 11 people on a committee, and we'll have the same vote.
So just follow up, when would these things be, you said there's minuscule improvement, so when is the plan that the streets will become safer for cyclists?
So so it's a long time. So even at the rate, so the doubling the budget last year is stabilised the situation. If you email, I've got a nice graph I can share with you. I'll show you the graph. But it's going to take time. It's going to take time. I mean, last year we resurfaced between 500,000 and 600,000 square metres of roads and footpaths. We've yet to see the totals for this coming year, but it's going to be something similar. But despite that, and people here take this seriously, last week in the budget, so we put forward 23.5, there was a party, and I'm not going to get political, they said 10 was enough. So that was below, at that level, the roads and footpaths would get worse. And that's what council officers are telling them. So we have to get this right.
I just encourage
Laura,
people to...
Laura, would you like to answer that question as well?
Encourage people to make sure they report, because they won't get fixed if they're not reported.
True.
Yeah, I think there's a fix. Do you have the fix my pothole? Does that work in Cycling UK or Cycling Scotland? Fix that hole. Fill that hole.
It just generates an email and comes
generates
to
an email. Yeah.
So it doesn't go right into our database.
Okay.
Unfortunately.
I see. Yeah.
But still.
But yeah, it's a very serious issue. I was shocked with the state of the roads. Actually, I thought Newham was bad in East London, but this is
just
another
to reassure
level.
people, official stats show that Glasgow is worse.
From Kirsty.
Thanks, patiently waiting. Laura, thank you so much for spending time. It was really great to see you. So I've got a question, sort of streets versus junctions. So we've, in the past, seen, the occasional, especially in spaces for people, actually, where we, the council did great work on getting temporary segregated infrastructure in, and then when we got to the junction, it stopped. And we've still got that over in the east, where I live, and we have one of the most dangerous junctions in the city, where 2 people have been killed by HGV drivers. And I really wanted to know, in your experience from looking at various cities across the world, what cities are getting the junctions right? So it's hard enough to get the segregated infrastructure in on the strategic route, but it often stops when we get to the junction. So I'm just wondering what your advice might be to Councillor Arthur about that. We are starting to see it come in the city, but we have lots of very dangerous junctions, and we're not seeing the action that we need on them. Thank you.
Yeah. So junctions are the hard bit, and this has been a problem with the street-based schemes around the UK and around the world. The ones are easy to put in on a straight line, but once you get to the junction, you can't do that. And so that's the hard bit. You actually need to reconfigure, either separate cyclists spatially or temporarily, so they're either moving at different times or in a different space. And it is hard to do, and it's expensive, and I know that I'm not making excuses, but that is a difficult thing. One city that's doing well is Manchester. They're doing a lot of these Cyclops junctions, and they are quite extensive. They've got a cycle lane around the outside, and then a kind of pedestrian route, and then the traffic can cross, and you get all green phase, and it's very efficient. And the great thing about them is that they move the same capacity of traffic. So if you're concerned about traffic capacity reduction, they're actually very effective. And so one place that's doing them well, and it's sort of quietly getting on with them at quite a rapid speed. But it is a thing to do, and it requires kind of unpicking of transport networks, and but they are deadly, and we know that something like 70% of collisions happen at junctions, and it's really important to get those right.
Just the next question today, French, actually, at the end, sorry. I'm trying to do these roughly in the order that I saw the hands on.
Hi. 30% reduction in car kilometres by 2030. Check my watch, is less than 6 years away. How do the scale of Edinburgh's proposals compare to other cities which have seen even a 10% reduction in car kilometres over that kind of timescale?
Sorry, say again.
The question was, how do the speed of Edinburgh's development compare to other cities expecting the next 6 years to get 30?
Trajectory. I mean, obviously, it's been very slow, and it's been very slow. I think things have been bogged down in legal challenge, like I've said, and like probably everyone knows. But I think there is a point at which you start to gather momentum, and once you have a pipeline of projects in, things start to move quickly if you're able to fund them and if you have the political will to keep going. Comparing it to other cities is perhaps hard. I don't really have the data, but I know that the beginning has been slower, and that's because of the unique situation in Edinburgh. Things have been difficult to deliver, and I don't know, it seems like there's political will, so if all goes well, I don't know. It's hard to say if it's achievable, but I guess we can hope.
So I mean, if you don't, so David, there's a real challenge here, you know. So if you look at the national target, 20%, there's no roadmap yet. I mean, they've got a document called the roadmap, but it's not there. And what happened on Tuesday was the money for investing in bus was paused. The money for rail is going backwards. We've got a demand for a train station in Winchborough at the edge of the city. Everybody wants it to happen, but it's not happening. So that there's real issues here. I mean, it's an issue that we take really seriously, you know, in terms of dealing with the congestion issue and cutting traffic as part of that. But we can only spend the money as fast as we get it. We can close down the city, but that's going to be, you know, which doesn't cost very much money, but that's going to be really damaging for the economy, people's livelihoods, jobs, etc. So I think you're right to come here and urge us to go faster on this and get it right for the city, but we need funding to deliver it. And you know, in the budget on Tuesday was not helpful. But this is old news, you know, this has been talked about for some time.
I guess sort of following on from Dave's question there, I mean, I think the councillor mentioned the importance of reliability in getting people to use public transport, and also the slide up on the screen showing massive traffic displacement onto Lothian Road. And in the context of what Dave's saying about aiming for 30% reduction and what you're saying about the lack of money, I mean, ultimately, are we going to go back to the sort of congestion charging plan from 20 years ago, which was rejected? Is that really the only viable solution here? And I guess be interested to hear Laura's opinion in the context of other cities in the UK or elsewhere. Who do you ultimately end up having to do road pricing or congestion charging to make this work?
So this is a good question, but the problem we would have is if we were to install congestion charge in Edinburgh tonight. Like I said, I've got other things to do after this, but if we were to do it tonight, it would be immoral because people in surrounding local authorities have no real way to get into the city yet in terms of public transport. People in East Lothian, the trains are already full. People coming in from East Lothian. I was on the Borders Railway line last Tuesday, leaving Edinburgh, standing room only, out. So we need to get more capacity in public transport for that to happen. Of course, we could borrow against congestion charge income to do this kind of thing, but we have to put the capacity in place, at least in line with that coming. The road pricing question, though, is much more interesting. I think what we need, and perhaps wishful thinking, is, you know, the money that, you know, those of us in the room that own a car, when you buy your petrol or diesel, you're paying tax on that just now. There's fewer diesel and petrol cars getting bought all the time. That means that we're losing that fuel excise duty. So road pricing is a alternative to that, which can be tailored to meet a city's needs or a country's needs. So we really need the UK and Scottish Government to work together on this because it's inevitable. I think road pricing is almost inevitable. I don't really see what's the alternative. We charge people tax for charging our cars at home. It seems a bit clunky to me. So it's inevitable. We probably have to do it by around 2030. So we need the Scottish and UK governments to work together on this. The Scottish government's already done consultancy work on it. I think they call it Pay As You Drive. That report has been written, but we've not seen any progress with it. But it does need NEB to work with the UK government to make it work. And to be honest, you know, the old-fashioned congestion charge of a ring around the city, you know, cameras on the bypass or whatever, if we were to do that, it'd be obsolete almost straight away because I think road pricing, it allows you so much more tailoring. You can do it based on type of vehicle, time of day, distance travelled, and all these other things, whereas a congestion charge is quite a blunt tool, I think. So it needs governments to work together.
I guess I'd like to ask Laura just what her thoughts on road use pricing are, particularly from her experience of other cities and various tools at our disposal, one of those, that being one of them, see what her thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I think I remember the CEO of London Cycling Campaign saying about, I don't know, a good 8-9 years ago to me that road user pricing was inevitable. Because, and I think he was the first person I'd heard say it, and it felt quite radical at the time, from the economics, it seems like it needs to happen, but we're not really having that conversation. It seems to be kind of a lot of shouting, and it's kind of a bit of a dirty word, isn't it? It's being seen as, I don't know, unfair. It's hard, but I think it has to be a carrot and stick situation. There has to be alternatives for people to use, and there's got to be some sort of disincentive for using the car. Behaviour change is hard, but there's got to be, I guess, a range of options.
Thanks. There are a couple of questions. There was one here and one here. There's also there's some in this side of the room which haven't been answered yet, which were quite early on, actually, Martin. So go for a couple there and move over here.
This is a question about the low emission zones and taking all the traffic out of the city. So why do we need to do both of them?
So, I mean, I'll be honest with you, sir, I don't think the low emission zone is going to have too much of an impact on traffic volume coming into the city. I mean, the latest data we have is slightly dated sort of in terms of the vehicles coming in, but we've already got very high levels of compliance, over 90% for petrol vehicles. This was based on January 23. Over 90% for petrol vehicles. The bus fleet in Edinburgh is already 100% compliant. Privately owned, company-owned diesel vehicles, high compliance. The main gap is privately owned diesel vehicles, but that gap will have closed since that data was published last January. So it'll have an incremental impact on traffic coming through the city centre, but I don't think it's going to be transformational. I mean, the point I raised with the Cabinet Secretary this morning is that our low traffic city centre, the no through routes, is coterminous with the low emission zone. So hopefully that will multiply the benefits of the low emission zone. But the challenge is that we might end up with more emissions around that Lothian Road, York Place boundary. So that's something we're working through careful monitoring. Well, I mean, so when I speak to people in public health about air quality in the city, and also people like, I met with British Heart Foundation a week or two ago, and I'm hopefully going to meet them. They're going to introduce me to the consultants at Royal Infirmary who look at respiratory issues to see some of the research. They would not forgive me if I was to try to pause the low emission zone, because the impact it has on older people in the city, and we're all going to be old one day, younger people and people with certain health conditions. I think it's a moral responsibility we have to deal with it.
I think Councillor Arthur's answered the question. Actually, I think we'll move on from that now. I think it was a good answer he gave. There's a question just next to you, Martin. Ben, just behind you.
I had a question about finishing infrastructure. So you were talking about the city centre, West East Link, and the fact that it's got an opening date, which is great. But I'm also very aware that the trams to Newhaven and sort of Leith Walk, famous Leith Walk cycle path, includes things like sort of manhole covers that utility companies still haven't dealt with. There's still sort of other snagging issues on the path, including a lamppost in the middle of it on Picardy Place, which has been there long enough to now have its own Twitter account. And it's one of these things. I guess my question is actually to both of you, because Laura, you may have experience of this from elsewhere as well, is how do we deal with that sort of tail end of a project? Because obviously the car traffic has been reintroduced to Leith Walk for over a year now, and that lane still isn't actually officially open or finished. And it's how does the council, how is there a process of holding contractors to account and making sure that those things actually get finished up and the snagging gets done in a timely manner going forward?
So it turns out you were cycling on a non-cycle lane today, Laura, because it's not been opened yet. So I was speaking to Hannah, who was on the slides earlier today. I'm just getting an update on what's happening with tram, and I did ask that very question, and she did promise me she would get back to me on it. But they are working really hard to finish these things off. I mean, there's all sorts of issues. The lamppost is frustrating because I know that at least 2 times, I think I'm right in saying, it was set up to remove it, but then other things got in the way, weather. So hopefully we'll get to it eventually. And the Leith Walk stuff as well, it's frustrating. But all the snagging with the line, and and it's important to remember that the line itself, the tram bit, is fantastic. You know, the tram, I don't know if you've seen this, Laura, but the trams are very busy. The biggest issue the tram company has is their ticket inspectors can't get through the tram because there's so many people on it. So that's great. But the public realm aspect, there is some catching up to do, without a doubt. But we have committed to putting details of what the outstanding snagging issues are in the public domain, and that should come soon. And that'll enable, you know, community councils and perhaps even spokes to keep pestering us to get this right, because we do have to get it right. And that's why I said earlier, I didn't say the tram project was finished. I said that it accepted paying passengers ahead of the deadline. Because for a lot of people, it's not been finished yet, because they deal with this outside their doorstep, you know, so we have to get it right.
Laura, have you seen similar snagging issues in other cities?
Yeah, I think it's quite common. I think something can change, something moves, and then it becomes very hard to take stuff away once it's there, I think. Yeah. But I did cycle past it today, and I saw the little fence around it, and someone has done a little, looks like a tombstone with like cuneiform on it. I can give this space back, but yeah.
Sorry, I'm trying to get the questions roughly in order of when the people stuck their hand up. So that's all right.
There's someone here at the front as well.
Thank you. I'm really impressed by the vision of the city centre and the citywide proposals. But one thing really puzzles me, and that is the maintenance of a north-south and an east-west general traffic route for private cars. You talk lots about this, how the town must continue to work. That's great, the commercial vehicles, but maintaining an east-west unrestricted traffic route for private cars is a real conundrum. I really do not understand why we haven't gone to a structure which is that you can drive to, but you can't drive through the city centre. Thank you.
So I mean, the city does have to work, and you know, as the gentleman made earlier, vehicles still do have to move around the city. Perhaps, you know, most importantly, that movement of goods and services, and you know, and what's presented on the screen here is a big expansion of what was proposed a couple of years ago. We've taken on board that feedback. So it's bigger, bolder, and we're going to move faster now. That's the three words I used to describe it all. And so we are pushing the limits, I think, of what's possible without bringing damage to the economy, you know, jobs, livelihoods, and well-being, and all the rest of it, which is really, really, really important. I don't want to sound too flippant about that. So what we've got is something we think that will work, and what we want, of course, is for this to work. No doubt when it comes in, there'll be fine-tuning to do. I mean, personally, I have concerns about some of the displaced traffic we're going to get in those non-arterial routes around the edge of it. So we have to be able to hopefully predict some of them, but be agile in dealing with those problems, particularly in the new town, because they're already concerned about the knock-on impact of the low emission zone. But if this works and it thrives and people love it, we can do more.
I think the question
and that's what happened. And that's what happened in Ghent. I mean, Ghent's journey is over a long time. It goes back to the 90s, I think. But they moved quickly in more recent years. But they've been on a journey, and so are we. I think the question. And also, and the important thing is here, is that we're moving. I mean, I came here in 1996, and we're talking about this stuff. And you know, I joined a committee, transport committee, in 2017. And the start of this plan came forward. And people said, we've heard this before. We've got a plan. It's in the council offices somewhere. What are we wasting time on? The difference is now we're delivering it. And that's a big, big difference. And we're going to deliver it at scale and with speed. And that's a difference as well. So, but you're welcome, sir, to be on the sidelines. Sidelines is the wrong phrase. You're welcome to be there in the city centre, urging us to go further and faster. Very welcome to do that.
Well, we may come back to, there's another question at the front, we may come back to that question.
I actually wanted to get back to Kirsty's question, and you had talked about temporal issues around junctions, and I honestly wonder why we can't do more to make these junctions safer already. We can put cameras on the line before a bike box and ticket drivers, lorry drivers, bus drivers, private drivers, taxi drivers who go across that line and eat into the bike box so that bicyclists are both not able to get in there or are not able to be seen. We can start putting temporal solutions like they are that are available in other cities and are not frequently used here, where cyclists are able to ride off 1 to 2 seconds before the rest of traffic. We don't need to redesign a single junction or redesign a single street or close off any traffic anywhere to do 2 relatively cheap and quick wins like that would frankly save lives.
So this is good. So the quick win phrase, there is really important. So last year as a city, we established what are and I'm not allowed to call them the 40 most dangerous junctions, the 40 highest risk junctions or most interesting or whatever phrase you want to use, but not highest, not most dangerous. We established what the 40 were and we've ranked them. The top 10 are going to be prioritised for significant change. But all 40 are going to get considered for quick win changes. The list is now 41, believe it or not, but the 41st one isn't quite on the list, it's getting treated separately. So this is really important for the reasons that we raised earlier about a lot of this stuff is easy if you've got money, but junctions are still difficult even if you do have money. We had the National Summit yesterday on road safety. We hosted it in the City Chambers, and this is because road safety in Scotland is going backwards. We're nowhere near national targets for road safety. Deaths on Scotland's road are way higher than they should be. We're way off target. And one estimate yesterday is the cost of those deaths and serious injuries, maybe take this with a pinch of salt if you like, but £1.5 billion. It's a shame we didn't have that money and we could spend it on actually preventing those lives being lost, but that's the cost that was mentioned yesterday.
I think if you
but I'm coming to a point. But my ask at that yesterday was for more money, of course, because that's what councillors always do, but also more powers, because on things like speeding, prohibitions outside schools, prohibitions on turns, jumping lights, the council has no power. That's with the police. And the problem is for the police have other priorities. And I don't mean that in a flippant or negative way, but they have other priorities. They're squeezed as well. But road safety is an absolute priority for the council. And so if we had powers to enforce these things, we would do it. And so that was my ask yesterday at that summit, the national summit, was to say we have to look at giving councils more powers to deal with these things. Because you're right, these interventions could be really cheap, but be really impactful.
Thanks
and
very
so
much.
that was my plea. So as
We've
well
only
as asking the government for more money, we need more powers as well.
We've only got about 5 minutes left, and there's several questions on this side of the room. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to get through all of them, but I will try.
I wondered about the possibility of an incentive for middle-of-the-night deliveries.
Yes. So already happens, and for the work we're doing on bus priority, that paused work on the arterial bus routes, what that's going to have to mean is we're going to have to engage with all those businesses down those routes to say to them, well, actually, it's not a good thing really for the city for you to be loading at peak times. Let's move that loading outside peak times, and that includes the Greggs on Lothian Road, which blocks my bus almost every single day. Because there's quite a lot of people loading on their steak bakes as I go past. But so that is about finding a different time or perhaps a different location for loading. If you go into the city centre at night time, there's already a lot of this happening. Princess Street.
This is a great suggestion. There's lots of suggestions, no doubt, that could come into consultation. There's 2 questions, one here and one right at the back and one at the front.
I'd just like to reiterate the point about having a discussion about cars and their place, because there's this pervasive entitlement, I guess you'd call it, and it leads to, I think it's partly responsible for the way the Leith Walk cycle lane is, because it's just been this assumption that cars have to go there. You have to allow cars, you have to make space for cars, and everyone else must make way for cars. And that's why, especially at the foot of Leith Walk, the Leith Walk cycle lane is, I'm sorry, it's atrocious. It's better further up Leith Walk, I'll give you that much. But at the foot of Leith Walk, there's barely any space. There was barely any space for pedestrians before.
What is the question you're coming to? If there is a question?
So there was barely any space for pedestrians, and there's also a lot of entitlement from motorists. There's not a single day when I go cycling where I don't get sworn at or told I shouldn't be on the road, or in one extreme case, someone got out of his car and started to physically assault me. It's just, I'm not saying it's not all motorists, there's probably a minority of motorists, but that's all it takes.
I'm very sorry to hear that. I think you're in very sympathetic company in this room, and I'm very sorry to hear that happened to you. I'm going to go on to a question, if that's right, because we've only got a couple of minutes left. One right at the back.
Hello. Couple of things. The green lights for spikes. One of the problems I see is drivers are already learning that that's a green light for them. Like, we can go now. I saw that twice on the way here. Is there anything planned to be done about that? Is the council aware of it? And the other thing was, in the plan there, is there a plan to make more bike parking?
I guess as this is a general question that's come before about the fact that was related to questions here about enforcement. In fact, should enforcement be included in the plans?
Yeah, within the powers we have, and we can talk a lot about collaborative working with the police, but and for these moving traffic issues, but I think it makes sense for a lot of this to get transferred to councils. And I think in the rest of the UK, local authorities already have the power to do a lot of this stuff. Bike parking, I've been one of the good things about the last couple of days. It's not always the case. I get a lot of positivity on my social media, but I've been seeing quite a lot of pictures from bike racks going out across the city in places. And also we're committed, of course, to the bike hangers continuing to roll out, which have been quite good for people who use them. So absolutely. And to be honest with you, we're doing Living Streets tomorrow. If bike racks come up there, they'll be saying, well, why are so many bike racks on footpaths? Maybe they should be taking up car parking spaces instead. And I would agree with that.
I would make a
And in fact, I just say that if we go back to a bike hire scheme, that is my preference, is we put the bikes in car parking spaces rather than footpaths, because there's a lot of concerns about bike hire schemes and accessibility. If we just consume one car parking space, we can probably get, half a dozen, 8 bikes parked up safely without too much a hindrance for people.
Thanks. I would make one point, which is that there is some, Scott, you'll correct me on this, but some of the enforcement has to come from the Scottish Government, right? The powers allowed, for example, for ANPR cameras and stuff is not allowed here. That something that we were calling for, and that's something that's a government lobbying decision as well as a council lobbying decision. Sorry. Question just there. There's 2 more questions, one there and one there. We'll take one after the other and then answer.
I'm asking, could you clarify the north-south cycle routes across the city centre? Because it looks like Lothian Road is primarily cars. We've got the Mound, which is really steep. And then you've got the bridges, which now seems to be, well, it's always going to be tram tracks, and it's now primarily buses and walking. So could you clarify what are the main cycle routes north-south across that?
We'll just hear this question after that, and then that'll be the end of the answer. Just hear this question here as well, please.
The council might be aware that when we discussed things earlier, you said about working with businesses, but what I was talking more specifically was actually about cultural provision and about music venues. There's a big problem in Glasgow right now where there isn't sufficient public transport for people to be able to get in, so they're trying to drive. But now when they're going to go see a live music show, the parking charges have been extended between 7 and 10. So now the average gig goer has got an extra £24 on top of what they would pay to be able to go out and have a night out, which means they won't be spending money in the music venue if they go at all. And what would have been an £8 to £10 ticket is now a £50 ticket. So I just thought it would be good that you reminded that people go to grassroots music venues in the city centre from quite far out. And so if there's going to be no ability to drive into those places, then you say you don't want to stop, that you wouldn't bring in a halt to cars unless there was sufficient public transport. But it really has to extend quite far out to ensure that the whole city has got access to culture.
So so Edinburgh's lucky in comparison with Glasgow in that we have a quite wide-reaching, both in terms of extent and also it works almost 24 hours buses in Edinburgh, almost, not quite. So we are in a good position, maybe a better position than Glasgow. Now, so there is this there is this concern that the changes we're making are going to mean fewer people come into the city, and low emission zone, people have said that about the low emission zone and also these plans. And what I'm saying is our commitment is to make sure people thrive, they do better, not worse as a result of this. Now, this came up this morning when we were speaking to in the sort of leadership group for the low emission zone nationally. And please don't repeat this. But in Glasgow, they've got pedestrian monitors which monitor pedestrian footfall. And what those monitors show for them is where they've got them, there's been no decline in footfall. So people are saying there's been issues in the city centre because of what's happening, but the monitors are showing that footfall is holding up. I've not seen the data, so that's why I'm putting that caveat, I'm not reporting it. Oh, yeah.
Okay, thanks so much. I'm going to ask.
I think your question, sir, north-south route. So we'll start work next year on Meadows to George Street. So that connection right the way through to Meadows up to George Street, that will start next year. It will involve cycling up the Mound, I think, though, so that is a key route. And it's one of the challenges we have with this, is that there's only 3 north-south routes. And so in terms of doing this incrementally, it's actually really difficult to do it incrementally because you end up doing it in steps because you've got Lothian Road, Mound and North Bridge. So there's no gradual way to introduce this because of those 3 routes.
Thanks very much. I'm going to ask Laura and Councillor Arthur to wrap up now because we've not got any more time for questions, just very quickly. But I'd like to thank them both very much for their expertise and their candidness, and also just in general for turning up and standing in front of people and answering questions. So thanks for both.
And I'd like to reiterate those thanks, and thanks to Ewan McLean also for organising the Q&A. He's rushing off for caring responsibilities. And thanks to Sam on tech. And thank you to you all for coming out, for thinking about active travel, for cycling, and for asking such insightful and helpful questions. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.